The Gospel according to Luke chapter 6.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus continued to speak to the crowd and said, "But I say to you, listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. From anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. Even if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is it to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is it to you? For even sinners lend to sinners and receive as much again. Love your enemies, do good, and lend expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, we put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure that you give back. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
Please be seated. The Gospel passage that I just read from is a continuation on the Sermon on the Mount. Last week we began in Luke, as Luke retells his version, or what he reported down, or was reported down from that very famous sermon of Jesus. Last week we learned that in both Matthew's account and Luke's account, Jesus' sermon begins with his redefining what it means to be blessed, and it concludes with, build your life on a firm foundation, that parable. Last week we also learned that as Jesus redefines blessings, we understood that blessings isn't just the stuff that we get in our lives. In fact, what Jesus wanted them to understand was that we are the blessings. God pours treasures into our lives, and those treasures are meant to help us to be the blessings to the rest of this world. They weren't rewards just for good behavior. This week we continue with this very famous sermon, and we reach a passage that is one of the most famous passages of the New Testament. It has that phrase, love your enemies. Okay, now, let me see a show of hands. How many have heard Jesus say this before? Love your enemies. We're familiar with that, right? It's one of the most famous quotes ever from Jesus, isn't it? It's also one of the most dismissed quotes from Jesus ever. I mean, come on, who can do this, right? We always think of it as some idealistic, wonderful thing. It's one of those things that Mother Teresa and Gandhi get to do, but the rest of us, ain't no way, right? Come on, who in the world is ever going to be? It seemed as some unrealistic ideal. It's really good that Jesus puts it out there for those real saintly, holy people to follow, but the rest of us, there's no way, get out of here. And so we dismiss this phrase pretty much open-handedly. We ignore it. We think that's just too difficult, especially when we start thinking about not just the vague enemies out there that we never met, but our real personal enemies, the people who have tormented and hurt and abused and destroyed us. So how is this possible? Why? Are we supposed to just dismiss this? What do we do with this? When it seems so unrealistic and something that's so out there that we rarely in our lives have ever tasted it, let alone come anywhere close to actually loving our enemies. So let's unpack this phrase and what Jesus is getting at in this part of his sermon. But before I go forward, I have to put a disclaimer out there. Because one of the worst ways that this quote, in fact this little passage is misunderstood, is that people think it means that they're supposed to stay in an abusive relationship. And that is not true at all. Jesus would never have someone stay in a relationship that abuses, where someone is abusing them. Most often we see this when women are told that they must remain with an abusive husband. And this passage is quoted, oh, just love them and everything will be fine. No. There's no promise here that everything will be fine if you love your enemies. There's no promise here that you will not be abused. In fact, the very opposite. Jesus often implores people to help those who are being abused and taken advantage of. So no, you do not have to stay in an abusive relationship just because of what Jesus says here. But instead, I want us to look at this passage, these words of Jesus, for what they were meant to be. And that's not a command, but a promise. You see, there's a big assumption when we hear these words of Jesus. We assume that we are commanded to take the love that is inside our hearts and give it to someone whom we hate, someone who is an enemy, someone who has hurt us in a profound way. And that's not what Jesus gets at. Yesterday we had the funeral of Jerry Brawl, and as we looked at her life and some of the things that she had accomplished, we were reminded of an important biblical truth. It's that God's love is not something that we can hoard. God's love is not something that's poured into our lives. God's love is something that flows through us. If we try and hoard it, to hang on to it, it's like trying to grasp water in your hands. It doesn't work. It never happens. And we don't get the life-changing blessings, the life-changing things that happen with God's love being present in our lives. We can't have it, we can't hoard it, we can't have it poured just into our lives. It has to flow through us into the lives of other people. And when Jesus is talking about loving your enemies, he's not talking about us loving them on our own. It's about us taking God's love and letting it flow into the lives of people who don't deserve it. Think of a fireman. A fireman has a big, huge fire hose, and he or she is supposed to point it towards a fire, right? Something that is burning down. How would you feel? What kind of scandal do you think would cause if a fireman came to a house that was burning and said, you know, those are Democrats living there. I'm not gonna put that fire out. Or, you know, that's a person of a different color. Or that's a Packers fan. Well, no way we're going to put that fire out, right? That would be scandalous. It would be horrible. No, what a fire person is supposed to do is they're supposed to take that hose and not ask questions about whether or not this person deserves to have the fire in their lives put out. They're just supposed to spray the water and bring it down. They're not supposed to judge whether or not this person deserves to be rescued or saved or not, correct? That's us. That's what Jesus is getting at in this passage. God's love is available to you. It's not going to be just dumped into your life so that you can just swim around in it. It's like a fire hose. You get to use it, but it's got to flow through you to touch the world around you. And you don't get to decide where to point it. God has already determined that God wants those who don't deserve it, that means all of us, to receive the tremendous downpour of what God's love can do. So that the fires, the destruction, the evil acts of their lives can be put out. That's what Jesus is calling us to do. You see, the nation of Israel was sitting there passing judgment on all sorts of people, their own and their neighbors, and saying, yeah, you don't do enough, you're not spiritual enough to deserve God's love. You're not religious enough. You don't do the right things. You don't have the right lifestyle. Look at me. I'm a good person. I obey God. And of course, they obeyed God in the easiest way possible, so that God's love would be poured into their lives so that they could enjoy it. That's not how it works. That's what Jesus is rallying against. So as we look at this passage, we understand that, okay, so my mindset has to change. This isn't about me using my love to love the people who've tortured, tormented me, my enemies. Instead, it's me taking God's love and allowing God's love to pour through my life like a fire hose into the lives of those people who don't deserve it. That means, it's kind of freeing if you think about it. It means I don't have to like that person, especially if they're mean. I don't have to respect the things that they've done. I don't have to appreciate the choices that they have made. I don't have to uphold them. But what does happen is that there's a promise. God says, when you do this, the world is turned upside down. The world gets changed. the world becomes free. You know, in our world today, it's not hard to see how we are becoming less and less tolerant all the time, right? Hate deserves hate, love deserves love, anger deserves anger. That's the kind of attitude that people are embracing today. That's why we have situations like what happened in Aurora last week. A young man who was about to be fired said, "I'm not going to stand for this." And he decided to respond with violence and killing the people who were trying to let him go. That's why we have Hollywood actors who are upset with their salaries, their six-figure salaries per episode, and instead decide to fake a scandal to get more notoriety. That's why we have selfish leaders who don't care about what's doing right or wrong. They just care about seeing how they can manipulate others. We are in a world that is desperate for a radical change, a radical form of love. Martin Luther King, when he was sitting in prison in Birmingham, wrote a series of letters. And these letters, if you never wrote them, are fascinating. They're letters not towards his oppressors or his enemies. They're not written letters towards those who are racist. They're letters written towards Christian leaders who were condemning him for being an activist, being too radical. Christian leaders, white Christian leaders, were condemning Martin Luther King because he was leading these protests, and that was just wrong to do. And so he responds to these Christian leaders by saying Jesus was an activist. Jesus had a radical form of love that didn't stay with the status quo and didn't want society to be this thing where certain people were honored and privileged and others were not. Jesus was willing to love those who didn't deserve it, love those who hurt others, love those who took advantage of society. He's willing to pour God's love into their lives, to let it flow through him, to touch them so that those people could be freed, so that they could experience grace, so that they could understand this promise. I read a story just recently. And this was about a dad was talking about his adoptive daughter. He and his wife had decided to adopt a daughter into their family. And it was a young girl who had already been adopted into one previous family that did not work out. And when she came to live with them, he learned that in her previous family, the parents favored their biological children over the adopted children, the adopted girl. And so every year they would go to Disney World, but the adopted girl would never be allowed to go. There was always some excuse, she'd done something wrong, and she was always left with the neighbor, and just the parents and the biological children went to Disney World. When this man and his wife learned this about their new daughter, they said, "Oh, we have to plan a trip to Disney World right away." So they planned it and they announced it to their children, and right away they noticed that this new adopted daughter started to misbehave. All of a sudden, there's a tremendous change in her attitude. She started to, she was very, she pushed back against boundaries. She started to talk back to them and to do things that she knew were clearly wrong, that had not been an issue for her before. So he sat down with her and he talked to her about what has brought about this behavior that is just unacceptable. And she said, well, basically what came out was that she knew she wasn't going to get to go to Disney World because she tried to be good enough and she never was, and she'll never make it there. So why bother? And so it's that deep-seated hurt and resentment. And she didn't understand why the trauma was playing out this way, but it was. And so the man reassured his adopted daughter, no, you're going to Disney World. There might be other, natural consequences for your behavior, but you're one of us. You're part of our family. We go, you go. And he thought that would take care of it, that would reassure her, and that her behavior would go back to normal. And it didn't. It just continued to spiral out of control the closer and closer they got to going on vacation. Well, they left to drive down to Florida to go on vacation, and all the way down there, she was just beside herself. She wouldn't follow directions. She wouldn't follow, especially the basic safety rules. She was a torment to her other brothers and sisters. And her behavior, the closer they got to Disney World, the worse it got. But they persevered, they pushed through, excuse me. And eventually they arrived at Disney World. And they made it through the first day, and it was a horrendous day. Just dealing with her behavior became just difficult and burdensome, but they would not give up. So they made it through the first day, and he was getting ready to put her to bed in her hotel room. And she gave him a big hug, and she said, "Thank you." She said to him, you know what I learned today? Excuse me. She said, "You know what I learned today?" I learned that I got to go to Disney World, not because I was good, but because I'm yours. That's what this passage is about. It's about us helping people, this world around us, to learn that they are loved by God, and they get to experience the love of God, not because they are good, not because of their accomplishments, not because they deserved it, because they are God's. Because they are God's children, and God longs for them to be free from the torment and the trauma and the behaviors and the evilness that has captured their hearts. That's why we take God's love and we use it like a fire hose. And we let it flow through us and pour out and overwhelm a world that has never really encountered this kind of unconditional love. Amen? Our takeaways for today. We love our enemies, not with our love, but with God's love flowing through us. That's the key thing, because if we think that we are supposed to love our enemies on our own, that's just some command, then we wind up dismissing this whole idea and missing out on the promise that comes with this passage. And our second one is this: love your enemies is more a promise than a command. And the promise is this: when we allow God's love to flow through us, and we don't judge, and we don't determine who gets to be sprayed and overwhelmed by the power of God's love, when we do that, we are changed and set free just as much as the people we share. That is when we feel and experience the transformative power of God's love the most. Let's stand for our song today.